Hi, welcome to Cloud of Witnesses Radio. Very excited about today's episode. We are doing a special episode. We're calling it Orthodoxy and Recovery. We have with us a special guest, Dr. Daniel Ageza. He's an Orthodox Christian. He's an expert related to addiction medicine and is a psychiatry physician with studied expertise in addiction science and recovery. We also have with us David Carlson. He's an Orthodox Christian. He's 10 years sober, has been a sponsor many times, extensive personal experience with the Big Book, which we'll get into, AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, and the 12-Step Program. Also joining us, Robert Fortine. Robert is an Orthodox Christian professor. He is professor of history, as well as going to be joining us today really on the moderation side in terms of talking about this spiritual elements and the Christian elements of how this overlaps with recovery. I'm Jeremy, and I'm an Orthodox Christian, and I'm honored to be here today as your moderator and host. So, gentlemen, before we jump in to give you guys a chance to kind of say something about yourselves, we are going to be talking today about some pretty serious topics about addiction. What is addiction? What is recovery? There are some kind of shocking statistics that I'm sure nobody who has been within, the internet or television recently would not know. But substance abuse is rampant and is really, in some ways, you might say, out of control. I picked up some statistics here. These are national statistics. Half of people 12 years and older have used drugs in their life, which I thought was shocking. There have been nearly 1 million deaths since 2000 from drug overdoses. The federal government spends about $35 billion a year on drug issue, drug control. And not to mention, of course, there's the issues of, teenage drug use. There's marijuana addiction, the opioid crisis. Fentanyl has been making a lot of headlines recently. Drug-related crimes, what it does to families, on and on and on. Today, we're going to be discussing this very important topic, as well as how does orthodoxy come into play? How does the practice of the Christian faith help and assist and work with recovery? So without further ado, I'd like to bring on and have him introduce himself, Dr. Daniel Ageza.
All right. Thank you, Jeremy, and Robert as well for, I am Dr. Daniel Ageza. I'm originally from Ethiopia, and I'm honored to be here. And then, with this topic that we have is an important topic. It relates, it's not just about substance use, but it relates to humanity in general as well. But just to kind of give you my background, I came into the addiction medicine field and psychiatry. Initially I started medical school to heal the body, right? My thought was the hardest thing a human can go through is physical pain and death eventually. But in my path, growing up as an Orthodox, when I went to college, I left and became agnostic because of science and different things. Eventually, I was also angry with God at one moment because of all kinds of sufferings that was out there. And then as I was coming back, I was learning about all types of belief systems, right? And during med school, I encountered an addiction medicine doctor who eventually showed me about what it is. And then I could eventually relate myself with sin, substance use, and being addicted to the world in general outside of except God, right? So that kind of was the cue. And then I was asking God, where do you want me to go, right? I like medicine, but which field within medicine do you want me to go? And then eventually I saw addiction medicine, not just medicine. There's the whole layer of seeing the person, there's the family, there's the spiritual component, all of that kind of drew me in. And then eventually I actually learned I was not just helping people, it was helping me, because to be in recovery means you're actually walking the faith, right? You're not just talking, you're really doing what you need to do. And so that's how I got into it. And then now, I practice in addiction medicine and psychiatry, but we also are starting our own spiritual-based, orthodoxy-based practice, so which I can tell you more about later. But that's a quick intro from my side.
Excellent. Thank you, Doctor. It's a pleasure having you.
Thank you.
Hey, David, tell our audience a little bit about yourself.
My name is David Carlson. I got 10 years of sobriety. My sobriety date is February 24th, 2014, and a relatively recent Orthodox Christian. I got chrismated on January 1st of 2023.
Mm,
So,
all right.
yeah, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be getting into this topic in my life. It saved my life, 100%.
Mm, wow.
Very excited, and hopefully something we do here today can help somebody else.
Amen. Amen
Yeah,
to
this
that.
is great. I'm just very excited to be able to host both of you guys. And David, I'm so very proud of you. 10 years. That's just super. I mean, wow. That's just awesome. I'm just, keep it up. And, what a great victory. What a triumph in your life, and to go through that, right? It's one thing to read about the statistics of, the addiction that people go through and the human toll and all of this, but to have to go through that personally as you have, David, that is just, and Daniel, you as well, it sounds like you
Hmm.
went through a personal struggle as well, and to go through that, right? It's like a conversion experience, I imagine. It's like coming face to face with reality, and it's not something that you can ignore. It's right there. So you have triumphed, you are triumphing, right? It's a process, it's an ongoing thing. I'm sure you'll relate that to us here in more detail. This is part of your life, but this is a process you're going through. So very excited to have both of you. Can't wait to hear what you guys have to share with us and the audience.
Amen. If I can piggyback on that just briefly, um, I am honored to call David my cousin. David and
Okay.
I have grown up together literally from the time we were little babies. His mom is my mom's sister, and so we've been, very, very close for many years. And I
Exciting.
can tell you that I have learned so much from David and really seen an example of what discipline looks like. And I think we might talk about discipline a
Hmm.
little bit in terms of because it comes in orthodoxy, it comes in with recovery, and so I'm just humbled by David's story, and I'm just kind of overly excited that we're doing this today. If we can turn here, Doctor, can you tell us what is substance use disorder? What are we talking about here today?
Yeah. So, substance use disorder is a big phrase, right? For any substance that you use, we use a criteria to define, in the past, a lot of times addiction is seen as just a behavioral thing, right? It's like, oh, why don't you just quit? Just, it's just simplified because one of the things with addiction is what you see is outward expression, right? A person can't stop, they're just doing oh, I just told them and they're continuing to use, or they're relapsed again. All these, everyone else outside what they see and the inside is different, right? So in the brain we have where your brain is getting rewired, where you're constantly pursuing that drug because of the physiology that we have, right? So for example, dopamine is one of the main chemicals in our brain that signals us what is important, right? So if you anything that you need for survival, right, you get more dopamine hit for it. So if you have a great food, or food is like your brain is going to register it as like, that's a good thing, I need to have it. And then if there's sex, there everything that is good for you is eventually going to be registered as dopamine. And when you're taking substance, especially the main ones, right, they make you release a lot of dopamine, so your
Mm,
brain starts to register that as, it's important, I need to have it, even more than food, more than anything, right? Even despite consequences, people are, the driving with using substance, right? You're like, you're out of your mind. That's how you're seeing them from outside, but
right.
inside their brain is getting rewired, right? So from the medical component, we see it as a treatable chronic medical disease like diabetes, right? Especially like a lot of people know about diabetes, and if you have genetic, like if your parents have diabetes, your chance of having diabetes
Yeah.
about 30% as
Yeah.
the child. In addiction, if you have history of addiction, your chance of having addiction is 50%. It's even higher, right?
Mm,
But the way we treat it is like, oh, we see it in a very different light, and so we have to give it the same weight in a sense. Let me see. For some reason, my
because
video is
camera, you.
yeah. Let me see.
Daniel,
Okay.
Yes.
as you are working on your video, I'm going to ask Dave a question, which
Okay.
is I think
Yeah.
closely tied to this, which I think is very
Okay.
interesting. Dave, you told me one time, because we've had the opportunity to talk about addiction a number of times, you know, in our various lives and whatnot. And you said to me one time something that always stuck with me. And you said, Jeremy, you said, someone who is addicted, it's like telling somebody, don't be hungry. Like if you haven't eaten for 12 hours and you know that feeling, we all know that feeling where you're starving. You just
You
need to go
gotta eat.
get, you got to
You
eat.
gotta.
You got to
Right.
eat. You said it's kind of like the same thing. Can you talk about that a little bit? Hello, a quick 10-second shout out to the sponsor of this video. We've partnered with Lucia Candle Company, and supporting Lucia Candle Company will help support future videos of Cloud of Witnesses Radio. These are handmade, custom, unique, beautiful candles. There's a link down in the description, and if you use the promo code CLOUD10, there's a 10% discount for our Cloud of Witnesses viewers.
And I heard it described as like telling a fish not to swallow water.
Wow.
You know what I mean? And you cross that line, it's what you do. You know what I mean? Like I can't say I was always an alcoholic. Once I crossed that line, alcohol became my solution. My solution it was my fix. It was how I learned to handle life.
Interesting.
You know? So they're in good times or bad times or celebrating or funerals, whatever it was, it become my solution. And if I got a promotion at work, how do you celebrate me with alcohol, right? So after a while, that's all you do. You know what I mean? That it's everything else kind of fizzles away, and that becomes the only thing. And now it's the only thing you're searching for. You know what I mean?
Right.
This
Right.
nothing else satisfies that except for that. You know what I mean?
It has to be related. Yeah, it has to be related to what Dr. Daniel was saying about the dopamine release, right? There's this kind of feedback of, you have you have alcohol, and then you feel good, and then the dopamine reinforces that, and wow. So it tells me how difficult that must be to break
Right.
that, right?
That's what it always meant to me, Robert. When you describe it that way, of something like tell a fish not to drink water, tell somebody not to feel hungry.
Right.
That makes perfect sense, and I think it does. It ties into what the doctor was saying about this rewiring in the brain,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is not easily overcome.
My intention when I first started, I was in rehab. My intention was never to be completely sober. My mind couldn't up itself around not doing anything. Or again, I had to have something, and I was like trying to figure out the lesser of the evils. You know what I mean? So it was never my intention to be completely sober. I'll just throw that in there. And glory be to God, that changed. I heard something at a meeting one time. I heard a guy mention. He said, "Think about it gets in the way of fast. Gets in the way of fast." And I had been walking around telling people at the rehab I was in that I was going to quit drinking and I was going to quit doing, and some other drugs. But I said I was going to smoke some weed. I was going to, still keep doing marijuana. And I'd be good. I'd be good. And I kept saying that. I was like, I'm going to quit this, I'll quit that, but I'll continue to do this. I'll be good. And then I heard him say, good gets in the way of that. And I had realized, man, I am 40 years old. And I don't think I've ever tried to be my best. I had always been absolutely okay with just mediocre, just getting by, just paying the bills, just covering the rent, just getting by, just barely, but never trying to be my best. And then it switched my perspective a little bit, and I started looking at things and going, wow, maybe I do need to set this down. Maybe there is a different love. And it just opened my and that kind of broke into the rest of it.
Amen. Well, that speaks exactly to Doctor. Now that you're back with us, you can probably pick up where you
Yeah.
were in the sense that that what's going on in the brain and how is that addressed? Maybe if you could move into that as
And
well.
definitely, as Dave was mentioning, there's a component of like we're so learned. Oh, I should be able to do it just by myself, right? There's that component of it, and really, like it takes time to accept what you have, which we'll touch on. The spirituality component as well. Just outside of how do we struggle in sin, and how do we accept who we are. And how we're created and the fallen nature that we have, but at the same time, with when coming back to the addiction component, your brain is rewired, and we have different brain areas that initially you may start for a specific reason. I'm anxious, let me use alcohol, or different reasons. People may get into that initially, but once your brain starts to rewire and your genetic component also kind of fires up, then you start to go in the same circle, right? You get relief, and eventually you actually start having even relief, right? You're just using, just like David was saying, it's just like water for fish, right? It's like it makes you feel quote unquote maybe normal. Not, sometimes people are not trying to get high, they're trying to get back to the level of like normal, being normal, right?
Wow.
So there's a big stigma where people are like, oh, you're just trying to get high, you're just versus they're just trying to have a drink. You're a fish, you just need your water in a sense, right?
Right.
And then when you stop, you have withdrawals, right? Severe reactions that you get. Your brain is saying, "Hey, you need to have that," and your brain also stops making its normal chemicals. So now you have to support. You have to give it yourself. So people get in this, catch 22 kind of thing where they're going back and forth. They're like, I want to stop. I want to stop. Every patient I see, they want to stop. I mean, there's levels to accepting, or, they're still negotiating and saying, hey, I only want to, drink this amount, or I want to use this much. But and there's that component of I'm going through withdrawal. So you need that support initially to be able to get through that window. And it's not just willpower, right? And then your brain also starts to actually recognize different things and starts to put, so we call them triggers or cues, right? You walk by a liquor store, your mind starts firing, right? You're like, you need to go get there, right? Anything, holiday, right? Good things. It's not just bad things. It's not people because they're suffering. That's, David was mentioning that earlier as well. So there's that component of like your brain starts to rewire, all those things. So in recovery, which we'll talk about, there's a lot of work, right? So it's not easy. So we need to see it as a disease too, right? A condition, and not just, it's hard for families. So we don't want to underestimate that. Living
100%.
and seeing that is definitely tough, but there's that chemical component to it.
Right. I appreciate that,
Doctor,
Doctor, very much.
yeah,
What I
if I
would love
may,
to hear. Sure, Robert, go ahead.
Yeah,
And then I'll jump in
Doctor,
after.
I would like Daniel, and I'm sure, I think some of the audience members that are listening to this and watching this video are wondering, okay, well, I like to have a beer, I enjoy good food and whatnot. At what point does it become addiction, right? Because I'm sure that even in normal use of food and drink and whatnot, sex or pleasurable things, so it's normal, right? I mean, it's okay to eat, it's okay to have a beer and a glass of wine and whatnot, but at what point does it become addiction? At what point this trigger mechanism or this dopamine takes over, or one is out of control? Where is that point?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And there is some pointers we can talk about. There's, it's not as black and white. It's hard to say, right? In terms of like, definitely need to know about your genetic history, right? There's also how many times you do it, right? And then there's also how young you are, right? And a lot of times we're seeing kids starting early on, right? Brain is still developing, right? By age 25 is when you're fully maturing. Even though you're grown up and you're tall and you have all the features that make you look like an adult, you need to make sure you abstain from substances that freely goes to your brain, right? It does not. There's no limit, and that's where it can trigger, right? And you are at risk of kind of, if you were to say, turning on that gene and also being addicted, and then before you know it, it's too late, right? And it also depends on the potency of the drug, right? If your meth is for example, is that it releases the highest amount of dopamine. So if your risk of getting addicted is way higher in that sense, right? Compared to alcohol is normalized, still is, it's a major drug as well, but it depends. And so early on, as a parents, right, knowing, being with their children, having that free communication, why are we drinking, and also there are many underlying reasons why people get into substances, right? We want to address those ahead of time instead of just saying no, right? Because the kid may be anxious in a social situation, so let me drink, right? Or they may have different reasons why they may do that. So if we can address that, we can help, our children in a sense, and whether, because it might be a little too late in a sense after they have an addiction, but even though we can still help them.
Yeah, so it seems like a general awareness of, for people who are not addicts, right, and have like this bad situation in their life with substance, just an awareness. Why am I drinking? Or am I drinking too much? Or am I trying to cover something up, a fear or anxiety or problems? Am I eating because I have anxiety or whatnot? So just awareness of that. And also you mentioned what do you mean by that? Is that like wondering, is there a history in my family lineage that has,
Yes.
clear signs?
Yeah, so in a sense, it's not a one gene where you're like, okay, I know specifically this gene does this. It's more like a compositions of multiple genes, right? And it's more like if you see it, like in your family side, we always ask, mom side, dad side, anyone with substance use disorder, right? And you look for that. Obviously, you have to be genetically like aligned, right? It's not step, but that kind of stuff. But making sure your bloodline and that they have, alcohol. And sometimes it's so people don't go to the doctor, so they may not know too, right? So being able to try to get a sense from your parents, that will be helpful.
Thank you.
Interesting. I'd love to get some kind of feet on the street, because doctor, you're giving us these really excellent, this insight into the science behind this and some of the methodology as it's approached from the physician level, which is fantastic. I'd love to hear, maybe David, if you wouldn't mind telling us, when you look back, maybe this is like a two-part question. When you look back at the early years, do you see that there was a time where, hey, at first it was just, I would just go and we'd have friends over and had some beers, no big deal, to where all of a sudden, can you talk about that, Dave? To where do you think it all of a sudden, hey, wait a second, I'm not just having a beer with my buddies, this has become something different? Did that awareness come early? Did it come late? Did it come at all? Do you mind talking about that?
I can just speak for myself, and I can't really speak across the board for everybody. But me, let's do this. I was raised in a very religious household. I went to church every Sunday with my parents. Growing up, drinking and doing drugs was like not on the radar at all. And I started going to public school my sophomore year in high school. Didn't do anything for that first year, and then I've had my first drink the summer before my junior year. It was so amazing. To me, I thought, why is this such a bad thing? Why does this have such a stigma around it? This is a really good thing. I had a lot of fun. We laughed a lot.
Yeah.
As it made the situation more memorable to me, and I just thought, man, well, if this is so good, what about the rest of it? You know what I mean? That's kind of where I went with it. And but early on, I don't think, I wasn't a big drinker. You know what I mean? I liked to drink, but it wasn't like I was seeking it out. You know what I mean? I was seeking out, as an experimenter. I tried a little bit of everything, and I did across the board. It was, LSD, it was, meth, it was cocaine, it was, I figured I needed to have an opinion on everything. I couldn't have an opinion if I didn't know firsthand, right? And so after a while, you kind of go, okay, I like this, I don't like this, this is okay, this isn't, whatever. For a very long time, didn't see any problems, I didn't see any issues. I didn't see anything. And after a while, after a prolonged amount of use, start to see some start to get some what they call consequences because of it. You know what I mean? And now I've got to be at work early tomorrow morning, but I'm still going to go out tonight, and I'm going to stay out late because it's priority. You know what I mean? As opposed to, so now you're going up to work hungover or groggy or whatever, or calling in sick. So it starts kind of there. You know what I mean? If you start getting a few consequences at work, your relationships start to suffer. You know, your girlfriend or your family and friends. You know what I mean? You start to kind of go, well, there's a family get together here, and then friends are doing this over here. So I think I'm going to choose to do this, and I'm ignoring family. So you start to make certain decisions that start to separate. Even then, at that moment, it's not like you think there's a problem. You know what I mean? Because you're with friends that are doing the same thing that you're doing, really masked it a little bit. You know what I mean? So it isn't until start seeing all of these consequences behind and ignoring all these consequences that they start to pile up on you. And then you get to a point in your life where they pile up, and it's hard not to notice every year of what's going on now.
Wow.
Yeah.
So in a sense, it does not discriminate, and there's no bad people doing bad drugs. It's all across the board, right? I see patients, all doctors, all kinds of profession, all races. Everyone is affected. I've had patients where they went to their first dental appointment and they had the laughing gas, and that's where they describe. They're like, I had that boom, an opening, like, oh, that feels really good. There's a commonality, right? So, and then all of a sudden you're like, whoa, this feels different, right? So, and where people start to get caught on, and then it takes a while. It's subtle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you hear a lot of accounts of people that have been injured, back injury or whatnot, maybe even athletes, and they're prescribed a powerful drug, usually an opioid is my understanding, and that it brings such relief from the pain, from the agony, from the suffering, but that drug is the answer, right? It's the drug doing that. And then they get into this spiraling down of this having to have this drug, and you hear so many accounts of that, how horrible that is. Yeah, wow.
This brings up a question, Robert, that you had raised when we were having our conversations related to this episode. And I'm going to ask it, if you don't mind, I'll ask it for you, because I don't think you have your notes in front of you, because I think it ties in here. We're seeing this, Dr. Daniel is making his career, helping people in this space. To me, that sounds like a very modern phenomena. And yet, when I hear David's story, think that's been happening since the initiation of man. So can you talk about, and both of you, and all three of you really, is addiction, is this a new phenomenon? Is this something new that the world in the West now is seeing? Or in what ways has this been around forever? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, definitely. So it's not a new phenomena. So there's a one doctor that mentioned, like, addiction, the substances are changing, right? You're seeing opiate spike, and you're like, all of a sudden you're like, oh my goodness, opiate crisis. But truly the substances are changing. And even now we're having new substances, more potent ones, different ones. But it's not a new thing, right? It's more that medicine is catching up to it and saying, hey, they're stopping to stigmatize it, right? It's more like one family member who's suffering, just he's not doing anything with his life, blah, blah, blah. It's just all stigmatized. He's an addict, blah, 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 right? He's kind of shunned away. There are people in our society, right? Or they're homeless. There are different reasons, right? That are kept away, but now medicine is kind of catching up to it and saying, oh, this is, psychiatry has been doing it for a while. But now they're making it, that has been, for the last 6-7 years, it's been a specialty within, because they're saying, okay, this is actually a different realm, right? It's not just psychiatry. It has to be treated as its own. So, which is why you're seeing a lot more focus on it. And opiates also, they're killing a lot more people in a more sudden way, right? You're seeing overdoses compared to, alcohol, tobacco kill people all the time more than opiates, but they kill in a slower term, right? Your liver damage, and eventually you'll die from different reasons, but you're not overdosing and dying. So now is all of a sudden there's this high attention to it. It's like, because you're seeing people dying on the spot, right? And but it's not a new phenomena. I mean, we see that even in the Bible, right? People drinking and things like that, right? So technically, definitely not a new thing. And it's also that the humanity, right? There's that component of like we're addicted away from God, right? And that there's this big hole that we have, and the substance has changed, right? It's like, oh, this is not enough, this is not enough. Now you're trying different things, but there's that emptiness that we're trying to fill, and so there's that component to it.
That's what my question was about, was that in what way can we see this not just as something that a modern problem, that, like you said, like drugs have become more potent, more prevalent, more ubiquitous. It's all, they're everywhere, easy, cheap, and whatnot. But on the flip side of that is that this is a spiritual condition. This is a human condition, and people haven't changed for thousands of years. So that to me speaks to the humanity behind all this. What is, what's going on with us? What's going on with people throughout our human history, right? It's a question to ask, saying, why are we doing this? Is there a spiritual component? Perhaps our constitution, whether our soul is lacking something, or we're bored, or we're fearful, maybe death, we're socially inept, or, so that's kind of the question that I had. What's going on here? Can you guys speak to this? Maybe David, in your personal experience, you can identify with that, or shed some light on that.
Oh, I mean, I'd answer the original question really quick. Do you know in the big book, Jay Darney, recent thing, there was a group before Alcoholics Anonymous, right? It's called the Oxford Group. W, the guy who, one of the founders of AA, was approached by a guy from the Oxford groups, a guy that he used to drink with quite a bit. And so there was that little group that started before AA and was didn't have a 12-step. I want to say there was like, I'm a little mistaken on this one. I want to say there was a list of absolutes, absolute truth, absolute. It was very religious though. So Bill kind of got into it and reworked it to make it more universal. But the problem of drug and alcoholism is history of man. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's always been there. But the recovery side of things, I mean, up until a point, even at the turn of the 19, couldn't stop. I mean, they didn't understand it. I think that was the thing. They didn't quite understand it. They thought it was a lack of willpower. You know what I mean? And it's
yes.
thing, then why can't you just stop? Like, if I stop, why can't you just stop? And starting to understand it more, like we were talking about earlier, is his needs, and there's something chemical in our bodies that reacts different after you become an alcoholic. Your body, I heard it described it like, if you're an alcoholic, like one drink is never enough. Yeah, and ocean full of alcohol wouldn't be enough. You know what I mean? So you would start it and you just can't stop. But like I get thirstier the more I drink. Yeah. There's a certain chemical thing that's going on, and they're making all kinds of progress in that. But as far as the recovery side, 12-step program in AA blew up because they just didn't have an answer for it. There were a lot of people that, if you had alcoholism in the early 1900s, they would just put you with a like a psychiatric facility.
Asylum,
yes,
lock you up.
And just medicate you and trying to solve it like that. But there was really no solution. So this was a very amazing thing to have happen.
Yeah.
Very
to add to that, sorry, but you say how you mentioned blew up, right? A solution somehow came up, and that was where it can introduce to the spiritual component, right? Because the founders found the spiritual component of like this gap, and there was no solution. Man could not find solution. The only solution he can find was in the spiritual realm. And that is why AA and NA and all those blew up. And even in medicine, medicine did not want to accept AA and NA, even to this day. Like, there had to be a lot of evidence to say, hey, like, because people are like, neutrality, what is that? Whatever. Like, you just don't have, I'll give you medicine. All of that stuff, right? Even after 100 years of seeing how it's helping people stay in recovery, right? So there's that big component of that void that we've been just ignoring, and the medicine that is not found in medicine.
Yeah, from a Christian perspective, especially from an Eastern Orthodox perspective, there's this understanding of spirituality and spiritual discipline and sin as being disordered passions. So passions are not necessarily by themselves per se evil or bad. For instance, a passion for food or drink or whatnot, sexual pleasure or stimulation in other ways. But it's when it becomes disordered that it then they take over, and they're harmful, right? They are then take over and actually are detrimental to a person. So from the Christian perspective, it's very interesting to hear you guys talk about how these things take over and how they affect people to a point where they can't do without these these substances or coping. They're kind of coping mechanisms, aren't they? It's like a way of coping with life.
I'm reminded, you guys.
Well, yeah, go ahead, David.
Go ahead, Dave.
Okay, then you kind of jumped in to a little thing that would be about step 6 and 7 of the 12 steps, and it's talking about our character defects, and it's phenomenal because that's exactly it. It's everything. Our character defects, like fear. Fear is a good thing. I see a hot stove. Want to put my hand up. Fear is a good thing, but too much fear detrimental. You know what I mean?
Yes,
hunger is a very good thing, but too much hunger is greed. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So it's a lot of having a drink is not a bad thing, but having a dozen drinks every day is a bad thing. So it's all about it is about moderation. You know what I mean? It is about being able to reel that back in.
And
reminded you guys. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Robert.
I was going to say, and there is Christian spirituality. There is centuries, almost 2 millennia of history on how to deal with the disordered passions. Right? How have the church fathers? How has the church mothers? How have they looked at this, at the Christian discipline? How can we use our faith and deal with this disordered? It's kind of like a magnet, almost like it's almost like. We're like in this state that wants to become disordered, right? We're pulled to that. I think everybody is pulled to that in one way or another. Like you said, whether it's fear or lust or money, the prestige or social status, all the beauty, all of these things, they're great, right? Beauty, that we believe God is beauty. God is good. God is love. But these things can be, taken out of proportion. And then beauty is, it becomes one's focus, and then it takes over everything else. And for instance, well, I'm beautiful. For instance, it can become like pride, right? Isn't that what Satan, right? Is the story about Satan's fall, because he saw himself as beautiful and he thought then he was God, right? So there's probably one of the first examples of how a passion, a good thing, or a gift of the beauty from God can be taken and then taken out of proportion, taken out of context, taken outside the gift that it is, the God-given context, right? We're given something beautiful, and then we distort it, and we take it, and we run away with it. So what I wanted to say is that I think it shows you that there's this long history, and the beautiful thing about the Christian faith is that this is not just something that we discover in the 21st century or in the 20th century and go like, oh, hey guys, there is this problem, and hey, there's a solution. As Christians, we can tap into decades, centuries of history and the enriched, and so it's very exciting. And then to complement that, to marry that, if you will, with the modern scientific breakthroughs and insight, I think that's felt powerful. We need that. We need the things that Dr. Daniel is doing. We absolutely need that. It's fascinating, and it's absolutely necessary. So very excited about this.
Hmm?
It reminds me, gentlemen, of something that's been said a lot. It's a famous quote, St. Augustine, who really put his finger on this hole inside of us all. And he said, God has made us for himself, and our hearts are restless until they find their rest in him. And it's been kind of put into modern parlance. We have a God-shaped hole within us, right?
Yeah.
And we're trying to fill that hole with all kinds of things. And I want to bring this up because it hasn't been mentioned yet, but I think, and I want to hear your thoughts on this, David and Dr. Daniel. Because it is a spiritual problem, speaking for myself, I would say at the core of it, yes, there's these chemical elements as well that I can't speak to, but there certainly is a spiritual nexus of these problems. And that is not just related to substances, but that is related to, as you were touching on, Robert, the passions, including in the modern day, sexual addiction, pornography addiction, things of this nature that would assume also bringing those dopamine hits that are contributing to this addiction, to this abuse. Can we talk a little bit about that in terms of maybe just kind of adding some color to this conversation, that it's not just about alcohol, right? It's not just about popping some pills. This is turning on your cell phone at night and scrolling and starting to look at some things you shouldn't see. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah.
Please.
Absolutely. And that actually is, it kind of ties to what we were saying earlier, like where with the opiate, we're now seeing people falling apart everywhere. So we're like, oh, this matters. But a lot of people who don't have quote unquote substance use disorder or addiction are in those realms, right? I mean, there's porn hidden, right? There's sexual addiction, which are hidden. No one sees it. So no one is blaming you, telling you, hey, all that stuff. There's gaming, there's Facebook, there's scrolling, you're wasting away your life in a sense, right? And it looks like, oh, you're doing fine. There's only, Joe here, he's overdosing, right? No, that's not the reality, right? So there's that big hole that we all have that we're not filling, right? And even with chemically, we actually have seen with MRI studies where when people have what we call spiritual awakening, that's where you actually have higher dopamine release than drugs, right? So where there's more of where that hole is being filled in a sense, right? That's kind of
right.
a medical perspective of like seeing how how you actually can have that satiety in a sense, right? And that you're filled now, right? That's what you need, and that's what you've been yearning for. It just happened to be either you've silenced it or you've not been around it, and you're continuously trying to look for it. And so definitely, I'll pause there.
David, can you talk? Because I think what we're doing is we are transitioning here. We've talked a lot about what is substance abuse, what is going on in the brain on some level. David, you've told us a little bit about your experiences. We're transitioning now to begin to talk about recovery. What is recovery? What does recovery look like? And maybe to start that conversation off, David, can you talk about when you came recovery, real recovery? Can you talk to us a little bit about that and what that looked like?
Absolutely. So like I had mentioned earlier, I didn't want to get sober. That was never my goal. It was never attractive to me. It was the thought of me not having, I've heard it described in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous is that alcohol wasn't my problem, it was my solution. And I didn't quite wrap my head initially around it, but the more I thought about it, I was like, that's 100% where I'm at. You know what I mean? It has become my solution for so many things. Now you want to in order for me to get healthy, I need to get rid of my solution. So you need to replace that solution with an alternate solution. But yeah, initially I wasn't there. I found myself, I basically backed myself into a corner in my life, and I had nowhere else to go. And I found myself at 40 years old, homeless and without a car, without a job, without a relationship of any kind, and in a rehab. And still, even then, with all the big consequences, 3 DUIs and multiple stories. I mean, I could tell you war stories for forever.
Mm.
Taking 4 hours to time more. Even with all of that background, I'm in a rehab talking about, well, I really don't want to give up everything. You know what I mean?
Wow.
I don't really want to. I can't.
Yeah.
I just without a solution is unfathomable in my head. And
So when did that change when you went from like, I really don't need help, I can deal with it, to like, my gosh, I got to change? What happened? I mean, how did that? Wow.
well, wasn't my idea. I'll be honest.
Wow.
It wasn't my idea.
Interesting.
A very dear friend of mine called me up and say, "Hey, do you want help?" And I said, "Yeah, yeah." What I thought meant was that I'm going to give you a place to stay where you can get on your feet. You know what I mean? Fill out your applications. You can crash on my couch, that kind of thing.
Right. Right.
And she picked me up and said, "I'm taking you to rehab."
Oh.
I was like, "What?" And she, "If you don't want to go, then get out of the car." I was like, "Wow." Okay. And at that point, I had backed myself into, I didn't really have any other options. And so went into a 5-day detox, and then transferred into a recovery center. And so that started it. That's where I was. And so I had a place to stay. I was eating and, doing that kind of stuff, getting my sleep schedule back on a normal situation. And somewhere around 20 some odd days in there, 20 to 30 days of a clear head, somewhat, is when I had that epiphany about at that meeting where the guy said, "Good gets in the way of best." And then I started going, okay, you know what I mean? So let's give this a shot. I don't know what it looks like. And even then, I don't know, I just did, AA was not attractive to me. It wasn't, I just had all these people coming in saying, "Oh, at a time," and "Oh, keep coming back," and all these little catchphrases that used to just annoy me. After a minute, when you're in there long enough, and it actually then becomes applicable to your life. Like, to me, the thought of never, ever, ever drinking again, ever, just insane. It's like, dude, what about New Year's? What about my birthday? What about, you know what I mean? Like, all these situations that I could foresee. And they were like, "Look, you don't have to worry about that right now. All you got to worry about is today."
What's so fascinating to me, David?
And so, I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, I was going to say, what's so fascinating to me is when you said, well, it really wasn't my idea. Like it wasn't your willpower going like, now I'm going to change. It sounded like, it's like, I don't know, something from the outside happened to you.
I truly believe that's what it was. I truly believe it was. Because at that point in my life, I had kind of walked away from God, and I had become quite atheist. And I had thought that religion was a man-made situation to create, to keep people in somewhat under control. You know what I mean?
But keep the masses in check, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it was just, I just kind of walked away from it and just thought, nah, I think it's a bunch of malarkey. I'm just whatever. So now I'm kind of jumping into it and going to these meetings because that's what we're supposed to do. And the first time in my life, I'm like walking into these rooms that are full of hope. I hadn't been hanging out with a lot of hope in my life at all. You know what I mean? I had been hanging out with some friends and, some dark places, and there was no hope there. And now I'm hanging out with hope. And so it's very attractive to me. I'm not really taking all the lingo that they're saying, but I'm really liking how it feels. You know what I mean? I'm on this optimism and this, and talking to these guys that are actually doing this, staying sober, which was amazing to me. So I jumped, and even then, so I'm kind of coming in and I'm kind of like looking at it like a buffet. You know what I mean? Like, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this, but I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. Right. You know what I mean? Right. Still real skeptical. And it wasn't until about, I had gotten out of rehab. I was living in a sober living. and made some sober friends. And I had this one sober friend of mine keep asking me, so, hey, do you have a sponsor? Have a sponsor? And I was like, no, not yet. And he's like, what are you waiting for? Get a sponsor, get a sponsor. And I was like, I don't want to be calling somebody every day. I don't want that job. You know what I mean? They're off. And it wasn't until about 4 or 5 months in that I finally was like, okay, a sponsor. And then when that sponsor just started to, through the steps, and that's where the recovery starts to come in. There's a viewer asking about the difference of what is recovery, and I mean there are guys that just thank you, call it
Cold turkey.
in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, we call it white knuckling it, because they're just sitting there and going, no, I'm not going to do it, but they're not happy. They haven't changed much in their life except for that, and now they become resentful, and they're really, you know what I mean? And they're not, I think, joyous and free, which is a term out of the book.
That's fascinating, because I'm just going to jump in because I want to hear that juncture you got to. Like you said, you had pushed God out of your life. Part we're going to get to, and not yet, because I want to hear from Dr. Daniel, but where you're going to talk about when you had to confront, because the book brought in a higher power and you had to begin thinking about God again. So I want to kind of prime the pump on that one. Turning to Dr. Daniel, hearing David's story, the reluctance, the buffet style, can you talk to us from your perspective? What's going on there? What's that look like? How would you approach that?
Yeah, so recovery for what you asked, right? In terms, it's not a one-time thing. It's a process. It's a lifelong process. We always say in recovery, there's no cure to addiction. It's not like, oh, you stopped drink alcohol using and now you're good. Now you can think. You're always constantly actively staying in recovery. And there's the multiple component, how David talked about initially when he went into rehab, right? There was a 5-day detox, right? That's like the physical component, right? And we'll talk about it when we talk about orthodoxy too, right? God cares about matter, our physical body, our fallen nature. That needs to be, it's not only spiritual, there's the spiritual component which comes after, but initially you have to get that chemicals under control so that you have that 20 days or whichever days that you're mentioning, right? And for some people it's longer. That they need that mental state to, and the dopamine, all the imbalance that you have in your brain that is constantly, right? And the rewiring takes a while. The more you stay away from the substance, eventually you'll be like, okay, now I can start to make better decisions, right? It's not as hard to say no, right? And also you need all the and recovery component, there's the medical component, there's the 12-step recovery, which we'll talk about. There's the spiritual component of it. And we have criteria. We say 6 dimensions we look at: the chemical, the medical side, your psychiatry, right? Anxiety, depression, all the other different reasons why you might be using alcohol or substance as solution, right? And then your readiness to change, right? So it's like people go from, oh, I need help, but first it's like, I don't need help, I can do it. No, maybe I need help. And then they're like, oh, I really need help, but I need help in my terms. And then eventually, right? And eventually is when they say, okay, I give in. I'll do whatever you say to do, right? So there's process to it, and that takes years, for some people more. And even what David talked about, those that are just white knuckling it, right? It's a matter of time before they go back to it because they have not addressed all the other reasons. Because that's the beauty, in some sense, seeing it from my side. You see all spectrums of people, right? From all through their recovery, young, different ages throughout their year. And, they may be in recovery for 1-2 years, and then 5 years down later, they're back again. Why? What did you not address? And I always say, I can help you physically, right? You're in recovery physically, but spiritually you're not there, right? You don't have spiritual recovery. And it kind of ties back to my passion is like, I don't want to just heal your body. I want to also make sure I prevent spiritual death, right? That's the ultimate thing that we're looking at as well as we're talking about orthodoxy and the 12 steps. But yeah.
Yes. Well, I was so excited when you were saying that the Christian discipline, the Christian faith, the spiritual aspect includes the body. It's not like when we're talking about Christianity, okay, this is about your soul and going to heaven and, forget about this empty shell of our body. No, no, no. Christ came in the flesh, right? God came in the flesh. Well, that tells us something, that the body, our human body, are super important for God to come in the flesh, to be born into this world. So that tells us right there, there is this physical dimension of all of this. So when we're talking about Christian discipline and Christian faith, we're including the human body in that. So that's why I think the scientific and the as a physician, you're speaking, Dr. Daniel, that is completely compatible with the Christian spiritual aspect. There's not some kind of dichotomy. Oh, here you have the spiritual, and then here's a break, and then here you have the body and science and the physical. No, they're hand in hand. It goes hand in hand, and the solution, the problem is hand in hand, but the solution also is in hand, right? I mean, the problem is the body and the spirit, but the solution is also the body and the spirit.
And to add to that, Robert, that's more specific to Orthodoxy. That depth of acknowledgement of the body comes in Orthodoxy, not in Christianity has that, but Orthodoxy gives it even a special understanding, right? Like it's kind of night and day because you're focusing on just go to church. No, it's not just going to church.
Right.
Church that acknowledges the body too, which is your doctrine has to support that and your theology.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, why do Eastern Orthodox Christians make such a big deal about icons? Pictures? Nice. Christian art? No, forget it. We paint and we venerate God through pictures, right? Mm-hmm. Why? Because the body is important. How they look. The icons depict saints in a very particular, unique way. Christ always looked in a certain way. There's some differences, but you can recognize that person, or Saint Paul, or Saint John, because their bodies matter. So yes, as Eastern Orthodox Christians in particular, the human bodily aspect, the physical aspect is partial. I mean, is completely important, and you cannot diminish that or something, marginalize the body. And here you have the spirit, and here you also have the body. No, they go hand in hand. Absolutely. I'm glad you pointed that out.
That's a beauty of Orthodoxy, Robert. So well put. Yes. And I can speak as a former Protestant myself. Was that dichotomy in Protestantism all too alive and well? Even the way we would speak, it was, I got to get my heart right with God. I have to spiritually, right? I want to ask Jesus into my heart, and heart, it's your spirit, right? We worship in spirit and in truth. To a Protestant, that means something very different. That's all about, it's all up here. It's all how I feel, my spirit being open to God, in my head, am I believing the right things?
Yes.
Only within Orthodoxy, because by the wisdom of the fathers of the church and the saints of the church who have lived the faith for all these centuries, as Robert was talking about, wisdom of the church has come in to tell us, hey, these things we're talking about today, they matter. Why do they matter? Because they get in the way of your relationship with God.
Yes.
These passions and whatever it is, whether it's substances or the pornography, right? These things, that is what's putting a wall between the whole person.
Yes.
Theosis.
Right.
So, I just wanted to jump in on that. I think that's a beautiful point, and thank you for bringing that up, Dr. Daniel.
Yes. The fall included the body, but so is salvation will include the body as well. That's why I believe as Christians that Christ rose from the dead bodily, right? It was not just spiritual. He didn't come back as a ghost or something like that. No, he was in the flesh, risen. So I think that's really beautiful, and I think science supports that, right? That you don't look. I'm sure, Doctor, you don't look as a person that's just like just the flesh, just the body.
Right.
You look at you look at. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. I do caution that not everyone in medicine will know that, right? That's why it's important. You have to have that lens of Orthodoxy and the truth, right? The truth is what gives you the most understanding of how to even treat it, right? Those that are treating just medically only, right? They're going to see that their patients are going to struggle, right? Versus if you have an understanding that it comes from the source, from God and the actual truth, you're going to be able to help your patient in that way, and also help yourself as you're going through that process.
Yeah, so this is a holistic anthropology, and I think instead of just seeing it as just kind of this one-sided thing, so it's I think the Christian faith offers that anthropology that is holistic, and then also provide a solution that is holistic, that includes the body but also the spirit.
And it also kind of ties back to what I was saying. I said there's no cure, right? And from an Orthodoxy perspective, that your body is going to be fully restored when Christ comes, your fallen nature. So in a sense, we have to stay vigilant in that.
Yes.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen.
Right.
Gentlemen, we're going to begin to talk about the 12 steps of recovery, because Daniel, I think that's exactly what you were saying. This is a process, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm hearing here in these 12 steps is a treatment. You're treating a condition that doesn't go away. You're not curing it, but rather you're addressing how to deal with it on a day-to-day basis, something of that nature. And when I say we, I mean David and Dr. Daniel primarily. Can we talk about what are the 12 steps? Without getting into detail, maybe let's just talk about them briefly as an introduction to the 12 steps. Where'd they come from? How are they employed? Can we have that conversation?
Absolutely. 12 steps, I want to say, I mentioned earlier, there was a group before Alcoholics Anonymous called the Oxford group, and they had a certain, I want to say it was 7, maybe 6, possibly 8. I'm not sure. I'm not an expert and no authority on AA, but they use those as kind of a foundation. You're going to see some similarities and then some not so similar things, but there was a foundation there that they took, and they tried to make it more universal. So the 12 steps came about in, I want to say, like the mid 1930s, and we're right around there. And prior to the writing of the big book, even LW, Dr. Bob, first 2 alcoholics, started working through these steps and created this situation, these steps for which brought a certain amount of recovery. And both and it's hard to do an overview of all of the steps. It's such a huge thing, but basically you're identifying a problem, identifying a solution, accepting the solution for the problem. Now you're going to jump into finding the roots and causes why the problem existed. You're going to address those. You're going to tell those to somebody, admit those dark things about yourself that you don't want to, and like confession. You're going to address the problems that you see in your life you've identified from doing this moral inventory. You're going to go out and try to correct those problems. You're going to continue to work on these problems. You're going to stay prayer and meditation, step 11. And now, once you've gotten it, you kind of gotten to the roots and causes, gotten all these things, you kind of cleaned your side of the street somewhat to speak. Now it's time to go help somebody else. Kind of like a general.
That's great, Dave. That's
you could elaborate. There's a lot there. There's a lot there.
I know for sure. And we are, just for the audience to know, we're going to get into it more, but that was an excellent kind of summary of the 12 steps. Dr. Daniel, did you want to, again, we're not getting into the detail on them yet, right, but did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, that's the main one. And initially, as a background, it talks about a higher being, and initially it was God, and eventually become a higher being. So there's a component of that, and there's, as the name says, there are 12 steps that you do step by step to kind of guide you and the main part. There's the spiritual component, how you define it now these days, but we'll obviously go over that in detail.
Glad you brought that up, Doctor. What step is it where the higher power is discussed? What step is that?
So 2 and 3, correct, David? So the first one is you're accepting, but 2 and 3 is where it delves into that.
You don't get very far without mentioning your higher power. That is,
That's huge.
the solution.
Okay.
Mentions in the book a few different times and in a few different ways, but basically it says, point of this book is to introduce you to a power greater than yourself that can solve all your problems. Not some, all.
Wow.
And and there's, but don't get me wrong, there is kept it so neutral because they don't want to,
make it
take anybody out
sectarian.
of it. And so there are atheists in Alcoholics Anonymous, and some people will use God as a synonym for a group of drunks. Use the power of the group, and so, they kind of go out of their ways. That there's a phenomenal chapter in the book that talks about called "We Agnostics," and it addresses faith, and it does it so masterfully.
Wow,
Phenomenal! It is super phenomenal. Highly.
I'm excited to get there, Dave. That's huge.
Yeah.
So why don't we do this? We're going to talk about the first 5 steps. Let's get into that. I'd like to, if you maybe start us off with your experience when you got to step 1. What was that like?
Step 1 is you'll hear a lot of alcoholics say that step was already done by the time you got into AA. Step 1 is, I'll just read it to be 100% on it. It says, admitted we were powerless over alcohol and that our lives had become unmanageable. If you're in a room of Alcoholics Anonymous, you're probably already accepted that part. I mean, you're not just in there because it's a cool place to hang out. You know what I mean? And the coffee's free. It's you're probably there. There's a problems. But
even the white.
You would hope. I would think so. For sure.
I mean, they're there because they have some issue, right? Some problem.
Yeah, but white knucklers really aren't going to go through these steps. These steps are going to bring about recovery.
Gotcha.
White knucklers, there are plenty of alcoholics will go to AA meetings and do none of these steps. None of these steps. They don't want to do any of the work. And kind of get into that a little bit later.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? Like I said, there's hope in these rooms and there's all kinds of optimism, and so they go there and they think just by showing up they can maybe absorb the steps through osmosis or something, and they're recovered, but they haven't done any work. And the solution is
doesn't work.
At least from my perspective. I mean, I know Alcoholics Anonymous doesn't have a monopoly on sobriety. I know there's many ways to it.
True,
but it's the way I know, so I can only speak for myself.
Yeah,
that's great.
But,
I guess to add to that, I've had patients where they have gone through the 12 steps but didn't really do it the way they should be doing it, right? That have, that didn't get, there's also a component of your part where what you put into it is what you get. It's like, but majority, as David is saying, if you're doing the steps, you've really thought about first step. For sure, and you've seen it in your life demonstrated. You've had so many consequences. You become, whether you like it or not, powerless over your substance.
You said some. Oh,
you said something so giant. It is so mandatory because if you can't, if that you're powerless, and then your life has become unmanageable. There's really, if you can't do step 1, and now like Dr. Daniel mentioned. Steps are order. You're supposed to do them in order. You're not supposed to skip around and hop around and buffet them like I've been to do for a little while. You have to, but that is a critical component. You have to say, hey, I've got a problem. Because if I don't have a problem, there's really no point in going any further. And I've had a lot of friends that will give up doing drugs or drinking or whatever it may be 10 or 12 days into it, and they'll go, I'm okay, I got this. And that doesn't You stopped. They say, if you know what I mean, there's really no point in going any further. Stay with anything else in those steps. So it's a critical step. Critical step. It sounds super simple, but super. I mean, I think that is what has enabled me to get as much time as I have underneath my belt, is I know that I have this thing called alcoholism, and I know that like it would take today is one bad idea, and I might go out and have a drink, and it's all over. It's all over, and that would be me doing my first step, saying, no, I don't think I have a problem. I think I can take care of this. I can, I can manage. I think I can have a few glasses of wine and be okay.
Dave, you said something that to me, because, we're talking about orthodoxy and recovery, and I could not help but see the analogy to the Christian faith. You talked about people who would come to the meetings, the AA meetings, and never do the 12 steps. To me, I can, just speaking for myself, that's how I approached Christianity for many years. It was kind of like, I'm at church.
Yeah.
I love what you said, like as if I was going to absorb it by osmosis. Even though I would have never admitted to that. Years of my Protestant life, it was just kind of that. I was Orthodoxy, to bring it to Orthodoxy. One of the things I love about Orthodoxy is about the work. It's about the process. It's about the steps.
Yes.
And I need the steps. That's what I've come to realize by God's grace.
Yes.
And there you have the church, you have the priests, you have the deacons, you have this hospital for the soul, right? The guidance, the spiritual guidance. You have the lives of the saints who have lived the lives for us, examples for us to turn to. I'll leave it at that. I want to provide that insight. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I'd love to add on to that, Jeremy, just because they call this the program of action. 12 steps is a program of action. You cannot just go sit in a room and absorb it. You know what I mean? And that's now that as I became Orthodox, I kept telling Jeremy, oh my gosh, I could see so many relations to this, and that's what I do. I see Orthodoxy as program of action. You have to be involved. You have to go to liturgy. You have to make confession. You have to take part in the Eucharist. You have to worship, and you have to pray, and you know what I mean. It is part of this program. It is amazing.
And it's not because somebody is telling you or because God is angry, but because that is the way of life, right? And if I may riff off the steps that you guys mentioned, liturgy. What is liturgy? It means liturgia. Liturgy comes from the word liturgia, which means the work. It's work of the people. And if you look at the liturgical services, there's steps to it. They're very methodical. And why are there steps? Because you know that you have to go through the steps of confession and singing and participating, and the priest also has very, very methodical steps to this. And it's not to box this whole thing in and make it this, this dry, dead service, but it's because this structure and these methods are life-giving. They help you reset your life, if you will. So that really, I think it speaks to these 12 steps at AA. It's amazing. It's awesome.
Quickly, if I may add, with the first step, it also, there's that parallelism, you don't do the steps without a sponsor, right? You don't just do it by yourself. There's someone who's done it, who's there shepherding you, who can speak to it, and you're admitting to someone you're powerless. And that parallels with Orthodoxy. You're going to your priest and saying, or you've dealt with your sins so many times, you're like, I can't do it. I am powerless. I need, it's not just my willpower. I need to come there. I need to take communion. I need the forgiveness there. All those things play a big component. And that's where you're seeing what the church has had for 2,000 years. And, 100 years ago is when you're coming up with the solution. We've kind of forgotten God in a sense, right? For many years. But the solution is there.
That's awesome, you guys. Turn now, second step. we primed this a little bit earlier. David, I would love for you to kick off the discussion of the second step. First, read it for us, but then can you tell us about your experience? Well, this was an issue for you at first, because you've told me your story before. Can you share that with us, and then we can jump into the discussion of the second step?
Absolutely. Second step is we need to believe that a power greater than ourselves restore us to sanity. Atheist, and I'm in a room of alcoholics, and I gotta come to believe that a power greater than myself restore me to sanity. I have, for the last so many years, done no, it doesn't exist. It's not out there. Resisted this one heavily, and I did. I mean, so let's get into this. So there's no physical proof that you've done the first step. Say that you did it, right? No physical proof that you've done the second step either. You can kind of just go, oh,
Yeah,
I know
right.
what I did, to be honest with you. I can say,
Kind of fake it.
until you make it, right? And as you go further into the book, it keeps bringing that back. It keeps going. The purpose of this book is to introduce you to a power greater than yourself. Now, for me, what happens is it's months. You know what I mean? You're starting to feel good now. You're sleeping normal. You've got a job. You know what I mean? You've cleaned up. Your head's clearing out. You know, I don't know. For me, it was like I was talking to my family members again. I was back in their lives and certain friendships that developed that were just blossoming, and it was like, man, this feels so good. There's a certain optimism that came with that, and I don't know if it was part of that. Somewhere at some point is there. Looking back for the last decade of my drinking and using, I saw that God had been with me the entire time, protecting me, keeping me safe, getting me to this point in my life. I was like, wow. At a point I couldn't, once you see that, you can't unsee it. Just can't unsee it. And because I've been in some very dark places. It's been in some very, very dark places. So it was, to look back and see that he had been there the whole time was just like absolutely amazing. And something people for it. Ever. They did absolutely insane.
That's so awesome. So you were an unbeliever, you were an atheist when you were accepting step number 2 when you first were introduced to it,
Yes.
right? You were kind of like saying, "Oh yeah, whatever," or you were maybe reinterpreting it or explaining it away, perhaps, or something.
Power in the universe, or not.
Yeah, right.
Not using
So,
the God. You know what I mean?
yeah,
The
right.
technical term for it. But there are plenty of options if you don't want to use God. You know what I
Right,
mean?
and I think that's legit. I mean, that's for some people that's fine. But at what point did you go like, no, I can't, I know, it's starting to dawn on you that God Almighty, right? That now it's starting to become clear to you. When did that happen? How did that happen? How did you go from atheist, unbelief to God is there? God is there for me.
I had mentioned I had grown up in a Christian household, and so I had that background. I had that kind of foundation. You know what I mean? And so it was my default from where I was to there. You know what I mean? And it was very, very Protestant. I, grew up in a non-denominational Protestant church.
Yeah, that's
So
good.
I just I fell back to that,
Yeah.
so to speak. But it was, I don't know. I think there was any one thing that triggered. It was just having that
Yeah.
realization.
Interesting.
There's no way I could have done and gotten here all on my own.
Wow.
And there's no, you know what I mean? And that I had
Yes.
something there protecting me the whole way and guiding me, no matter how dark it was.
Powerful.
That is great.
To add to that, for some people, for what I've seen, that sometimes it's exposure, and like over time, you start to investigate, right? What is that power greater than I, right? And even for me, even though I didn't have substance use problems per se, even just coming back from agnostic atheist, I had to search and say, what is that power greater than I? And like, I'm still empty. There's so many unanswered problems, right? Where you
Yes.
have to look and search for that. And as Robert, you mentioned like earlier, sometimes God gives us this grace, right, where and I think it's, even though man changed the word God to power greater than I, God is using that to give us this grace, right? Because we're so rebellious, we don't want God.
Absolutely. Right.
Slowly, we get introduced to it, and we're like,
Yes.
oh wait, this whole time it was God. And so
Yeah, that's right.
that's actually helpful in some ways. And
Yes.
sometimes even the people that use a God, they may use a different God instead of the true
Right,
God,
right.
and
Right,
can
right.
distort it and make
Right.
people like run
Yes.
away even, right? That's worse. So
Right.
Yeah.
but it's, yeah, God is graceful in that way.
I
Can
also
you
think that to answer your, Robert, I was thinking about it. The fact that I had stayed sober
Mm.
to me kept telling me that there was something that, because I had tried to do it on my own.
And
You know what I
yeah,
mean? And I could
and
never
you
give
couldn't.
up everything entirely. I could, I can quit drinking a little time as long as I was, doing other things. And then I can doing other things as long as I had alcohol, but I'd never been able to give up everything entirely. And when I started breaking like the 3-month and 4-month range,
Wow.
which
Wow.
was the extent, and I think I had about 4 months of entire complete sobriety in my early 20s. And it hadn't been since my early 20s that I had that. But once I crossed that line, it's undeniable to me that there was
Wow.
something out there that was helping me.
Wow.
You know?
That's
Can
awesome.
we talk about, Dr. Daniel, you had mentioned earlier, and it is amazing to me. You yourself, you're a physician, you're a doctor, a lot of schooling.
Mhm.
Assume a lot of that schooling has been literature. Talk to us, because here we are talking about the second step, telling us that the scientific, the medical world is still very standoffish when it comes to this God element, this God element. Can you talk about that? What?
Yeah. And some of the reason is with AA and NA, they they don't allow research, right? So because it's a community where it's run by you don't have, you can't go in there and check who is what, like, and that is, I want to say, it's kind of like a disguise not to trust the process from the medical
Right.
community.
Right.
There have been researchers where they're actually focusing on that to show, right? They have a spiritual background as well, and they've done, like, in the last maybe 5 years is when they're seeing, we really have data for this, right? That's not just not, oh, someone telling you I'm in recovery, I'm okay, like I'm in recovery now, and it's, it's what they want that is
Yes.
helping them compared to actually working the steps. And even the science world tries to break down component of recovery into, it's hope that you need, it's honesty that you need. They still
Right.
remove the God component, right? They're still
Yeah.
resistant, just like man, we're resistant to our 10th. By his
Yes.
grace, we come to him, but they're still resistant. But it takes a lot of pushing. You need.
Yeah.
It's kind of like Orthodoxy, right? You have the light, and you have to give it the light to the world, and it's our job to
Yeah.
do that as well in all sectors that we are, as a physician, as any, and so that's one of the things I try to do too when you're going out there and sharing.
And I think the resistance in many ways is actually appropriate, is actually good, because science has its domain and its methods. And so claims to a higher power outside the methods and the domain of scientific inquiry. So
Absolutely.
it is, and I think it's always when you see some atheistic scientist smuggle in their atheism, and they venture in, to apply science to the faith, or lack thereof, then I think they're actually violating the scientific method of inquiry. And so I think there needs to be that separation. It's not that they're incompatible. It's not that
Absolutely.
spirituality and science are mutually opposed, and they're set. No, they go hand in hand, but one can't go in and, so science can't really speak to matters of metaphysics, right? It can't speak
Absolutely.
about God and those kind of things. So
Yeah.
I think we need to keep that in mind. So sometimes that may come over as Christians. We go like, well, why are scientists so antagonistic to spirituality? Well, some may indeed be if they're
Sure.
smuggling in their atheistic prejudices. But if they're true scientists, they will refrain. A true scientist will refrain from making derogatory commentary on spiritual matters, because that falls outside of their scientific domain and expertise.
Absolutely. The science can only tell us the how, and we have to explain the why and who
Right.
does it behind all that.
That's right.
To the third step, or that you wanted to discuss with, I feel move to step 3 now. What are your thoughts? You want to read it for us and give us some insight?
Absolutely. 3. Made a decision to turn our will, our lives, to the care of God. We understood him.
I love that.
It's,
As we understood him. That's
we
so good.
understood him. I mean, little mention at the end of that, as we understood him, leaves room for anybody.
I love that.
It's inclusive, so to speak. There's this is a cool step. Me, I don't know.
That's
I
very
really
powerful,
enjoy
yeah.
this one. This is one that you do with your sponsor. There is a prayer that correlates with this step, and you and your sponsor will say that you say with your sponsor. And I can read that prayer.
Please, yeah. What is that like? What is that?
Perfect. Let me says, God, offer myself to thee, fill with me, and to do with me as thou wilt. Leave me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. Away my difficulties. The victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way alone.
Wow, so beautiful.
Yeah.
There's a surrender there, isn't it? It's a surrendering of saying, let your will be done, not mine. Thy will be done.
Absolutely.
Beautiful.
Absolutely. It's I mean, when I first said this prayer, it was cool. The more I've done this prayer with multiple sponsees, and the more that,
Yeah.
the more you see the beauty in that. It is, at least for me as an alcoholic, gotten to that point of being an alcoholic because I had in the driver's seat in my life. I had made the decisions. I was controlling things. I wanted things to be this way and that way.
Right.
This is me going, okay, I'm gonna jump in the passenger seat now, and it's a lot easier said than done. But another critical step. So at this point, we admitted there was a problem. We have found a solution, and we've asked the solution to help us with our problems.
Wow.
See there, Dave, is in it to orthodoxy is step 2, like wirer in a sense of, I believe that there's the big guy upstairs, it's like I'll accept that, right? He's there. But step 3 is asking me to surrender.
Yeah.
And that, to me, that's so much more. There's so much there that's when you got to get involved. You have to become a catechumen, right? You can't stand on the sidelines anymore.
Right,
right.
right.
And it seems like a step that just from the outside that it seems like a lot of work would have to go into that.
Wow, that reminds me of what St. Paul said about, when I'm weak, I'm strong. I'm paraphrasing there, but there's a scripture where he says I'll read it right now. It just came to my mind. It says, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, and this is Paul speaking in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. Right? It talks about,
Absolutely.
I'm weak. We have to acknowledge that. Paul was acknowledging that. He's writing that. He's saying, I'm weak so that Christ, his power, his glory, his joy, his life may shine through. And isn't that step 3 right there, right? I mean, that's connected.
Absolutely.
Beautiful.
And surrendering, right? It's outside of, it's not me anymore, right? It's not, I can do it. Oh, I tried and you saw,
Right.
I failed every single day. It's you now, right? I'm gonna
Wow.
dying to myself in a sense.
It's where our white knuckles go to the open hands.
Man,
Yeah.
amen,
Exactly.
Robert. Well said. Well said. Dr. Daniel, someone comes to you and they say to you, Doctor, I want to get sober. However, I've read the 12 steps,
Yeah.
not into it, don't want to do it, but I still want you to help me. Is there an answer there?
Yeah.
Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so that's a tough one, right? And so you're always working, the God, so he's so beautiful that he gives us free will, but he's always every day working, right? So as you're seeing your patients, you have to also work with them, really see where they are, what they're struggling with, right? Why are you drinking? Why do you think you can't give up? Do you see that you're powerless over it? You have to kind of work through the earlier steps, right? And what is your resistance about God, higher power, right? Or did you grow up in a specific spiritual background that, really threw it off for you, right? I had a patient yesterday that grew up as a Mormon. They're like, God is, like, this is not like what I know is completely different, right? Their image of God and who he is, what he's, is distorted. You really have to, it's kind of like Christ going, to the prostitute or to the quote unquote sinners, right? And being by their side instead of, staying from far away. Really, like, you have to love them and show that you care for them and say, okay, what are you struggling with? You have maybe medical reasons, psychiatric reasons. Stabilize them in a sense to be able to slowly work with that. Like, you're building that rapport and that they feel safe to even hear you, right? And so that's kind of like you try to do the love part, right? Loving them. It's kind of like preach the gospel with words when needed, right? Kind of like that, right? You try to do that initially. And then, but when they're open, right, it's kind of like what Robert was saying, that knuckles you see them starting to open up, right? And you're like, okay, can we talk about that higher power, right? And letting them know to go visit an NA, and part of the reason why I'm starting my own practice is also so I can freely speak about this, compared to when you're working for someone. It's kind of hard because you'll be looked at, you're pushing religion or, in a sense, but we're trying to work towards, where we can freely from the get-go be able to allow people to have a freedom to speak about these concepts and allow them to come there.
That's
but
awesome.
yeah,
Appreciate that. We talk
can
about.
I,
please, Robert.
Just a thought I had about this. You mentioned the sponsor, David, and I think this is such an important aspect because it tells me of somebody who is like a shepherd. I think, Dr. Daniel, you mentioned the shepherd. And I think this is really important because it has to be somebody that truly cares for you, that truly loves you. And I think, we have to really be honest with ourselves that there are situations where even in a religious setting, or sometimes especially so in a religious setting, it can be very toxic. If you're in a church that where your sponsor, your pastor or your priest, is not truly loving you or the people around you, even though they're a Christian and it's, but if it's not truly like a sponsorship, if you will, if there is no love there, if there's no care there, like a shepherd would look after his sheep, then go find another church, go find another pastor, go find another priest, because we need to surround ourselves with people that we can trust and who truly love us. Spiritual manipulation, misuse of spiritual authority, toxic, perhaps the worst of all type of toxicity and abuse, right? A lot of spiritual abuse happens. So I think I want to make clear that, and what I see in the what David, when you said that the sponsoring, you pray with your sponsor, that tells me of a beautiful relationship where you can trust this person, and this person is looking for you and for the best of you. And I think this is so important. Oh my goodness, we cannot go through life without people that we can trust and love,
Absolutely.
that
Amen.
love us.
Absolutely.
Step, gentlemen. Sounds thinking about the life confession made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. David, what here?
This case. So, in searching a fearless moral inventory of ourselves, this is actually going to be the very first step where you're going to have something integral in terms that you admit anything. You actually have to sit down. There's three parts to this. There's a resentment part of this, which the book describes as resentment or one of the things that take an alcoholic out faster than anything. So you know what I mean? Resentful of my boss. I show up to work and he's gets down on me and I'm gonna go drink. You know what I mean?
Right.
I get into something with my girlfriend, or I get into something with my parents, or something along those lines. It's one of the things that'll take you out. So you have to sit down and go through, the resentment you've ever had, or that you can not that you've ever had, but something that's more current. You know what I mean? It's good to be thorough. It's 100% good to be thorough. But there's that. Then you have to write down a list of your fears, and then you have to write down. There's a third part, and it's a sex part, and it's kind of sex harms kind of combo scenario. There's and I have to say I've done it one way. I've seen this done. I've seen thousands of different ways. I wouldn't say thousands, but definitely a lot of different variations of how to do this step. Right? But they say in the book, this is we're getting down to the causes and condition. Okay? This is a fact-facing mission. This and I'll be honest with you, this is where I lose a lot of sponsees. A lot of people they get in and they're like, cool, step one, full step two, full step three. Oh, I gotta get, now you're feeling good. Got, however many days of sobriety, you're feeling better. Now you got to get back into the mud. Got to kind of start to face some of the dirty parts. And it's not always easy. It's not always easy. And I, if just speaking for myself, I put it off. I put it off forever. I actually, I don't know. It took me months. And it was finally, I just said, okay, I'm blocking out a Saturday. I was putting my headphones and I'm just going to sit down and do it all. And and it's giant. Stuff is huge. This stuff is because for me, when you get through a while, after you're doing all this writing, you start to realize these things that you're writing down have one thing in common. It's you. You know what I mean? Like I had walked in AA going, I drink and I use because,
because of this, because of that.
Yeah, because of my FOSS and because of my ex and because, my mom passed away and I was feeling bad and it was, this, that, whatever. Your finger pointing, you're a victim,
Yeah, right.
This actually starts to show you that the only thing that all of those things have in common is you. You're the common denominator in all of those. It kind of just starts to open your eyes. Yeah, I mean, there's still a lot of steps to go, but you're starting to go, man, I am just writing down the same stuff. It's just me, self-centered, self-seeking, and it caused a lot of problems, huge step. But I would say this is the step where a lot of people will get to and just stop. I've had a lot of sponsees not get past this. I've had a lot of sponsees trying to put this off forever and never get it done. But that absolute mandatory, you was the recovery that you're looking for.
Yeah, so this is a big step in a sense, right? There's a lot in it, and there's a lot to sort through, right? You've in certain way for a long time, and that's led to a lot of consequences, a lot of relationship hurt, right? A lot that has gone. So it's a lot of unpacking. It can be very overwhelming, right? And the devil is there too, right? Pointing fingers at you, trying to shame you, trying to there's a lot. It's like a web, right? And it could be very intimidating. And that sponsor, right, that community, right, like something that you need that, right? The church has that community in a sense, right? And we definitely have to normalize substance use and things like that so we can support one another even stronger.
Yes. Yes.
But it's not easy, and that's why you have, people with real traumas too. I've had patients tell me, "Oh yeah, I can't go with God because my Catholic priest raped me." Like there are real harms that are done too that we have to be able to sort through, right? That's where you go into the physician and you're saying, "Okay, there's my part. They may have done this," which I guess in the next other steps we'll talk about, right? Or David, but this is a big step, and there's a lot of emotions involved, right? There's the fear,
Mm.
all that that gets replayed. So it takes months, right? This is not a one, small step that you just do. You're really unpacking. It's like you're cleaning out your whole house, multiple houses, right? It's not over the
Wow.
years. So it's a big step, and people need to be supported at this step.
Right, right. There's something about writing it down, isn't there, David? There's something about taking your thoughts and then putting it down, right? There's that physical step, right?
Absolutely. I think one of the things my sponsor told me to do when I was because there's order and a system that you do it in, and you'll write like who you're resentful at, supposed to write why, supposed to, and then there's some other sections. I won't get all super into it. He said the reason why into my stamina. This is about you. It's not about them. And so I was resentful at, I was just, because he upset me. I'm just like, he upset me. I don't need to get into the story and elaborate. The focus is on me. It's I've got to be looking at the things that I did, not what he did. So it's like the steps go in order, the order of these steps do, and then you have to finish out with how it affected you. You know what I mean? And they get you like 5 different examples of how it could affect you financially, whatever. It goes into it.
Relationships. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's mental health as well, right? There's many things so this is why recovery is you're trying to have everything together, right? You're working your steps with your sponsor. If you need to have therapy for the different things, psychiatry, your medicine, stabilizing, it's a whole comprehensive thing that you need to do so you're actually can get through this, right? Otherwise you'll go right back.
Reminded of trying to remember who it was that said it right now, but the idea is that my mind and heart are focused on my own sin. I can't be focused on my brother's sin. And I see some overlap there with this step. Like you said, Dave, it's about there to work on yourself. You're not there to, and I'm going to tell you all these stories of all these people that wronged me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
But yeah, that's powerful.
This is that step that would take somebody who's them from being a victim. And I mean, like you'll hear it. I heard it in rooms where a lot of people will say, "Oh,
Yeah.
they're speaking victimese," and they're young, they're new into the program, because they're still pointing fingers instead of owning what it is that got them into that situation. It's also when I started preparing for my first confession, it was exactly the same. It's exactly the same because I'm having a look at these dark, so pretty sides of myself and admit that myself.
Yes,
Oh man,
Man.
I you know what I mean?
Yes.
Got a lot of work to
Yeah, so true. This reminds me of this
because-
scripture where this passage in the Gospels where Jesus says, "I have not come for those that are healthy, but I've come for the sick. I've come from those not for those that can see, but for those that are blind, right? And guess what? We're all sick. We're we just haven't acknowledged it if we think we can see and that we're not sick, right? And I think that's so beautiful because this step speaks right to that, acknowledging that you're blind, right? I believe when Jesus said that, he meant that for all of humanity. We're all blind because we all need him, right? But the point is to make that personal and to say, I am that blind person. I am that sick person. I need God. And that step, right, speaks to that. No, David? I mean, it's like,
absolutely,
boom, there it goes. So beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's a liberation that happens for that. That my burden is light, my yoke is easy, Jesus said, right? Wow, I imagine that you start feeling now, oh, it's not just me, it's God with me.
You guys, as we turn here to step 5, the 5th step, I cannot help but think about Psalm 50, which is a prayer that as Orthodox Christians, we know well, we pray often, and I would argue is maybe one of the most powerful prayers in Christendom.
Yes.
One of the lines, for I acknowledge my transgressions and my sin is ever before me, right? Against thee, God, have I sinned and done this evil in thy sight. And with that, can we talk about the 5th step here, what this is about?
So, jump in on that really quick. And it is such a short step, but it's in hidden words, right? In 5, I'll just read it out real quick. Committed to God, ourselves, to another human being, exact nature of our wrongs. At this stage of the game, schedule with your sponsor. It's at least, I mean, we book out of 6 hours, Scar. Some can go longer, some can go shorter, but you sit down with your sponsor and you read him everything that you wrote down in your 4th step. Read everything that you read, and it is humbling. It's absolutely humbling. It's one thing to tell these things down and for you to know it. You know what I mean? But it is something completely different to have to go, this is what I did. Yeah, then and own it. And
Robert said there's even just to writing it down, Dave, there's utility to that, right? There's an efficacy in that process. How much more so in the wisdom of the church is the practice of confession. You're describing, Dave, to an Orthodox Christian, that's confession. That's the beauty of confession. Thanks be to God, right? Yes. Is to be able to do this not just once, but again and again and again. Because why? Because we need it. And it's there to help us. It's there to give us this transformation, to begin to slowly put that old man behind us, slowly but surely move towards light. And I love hearing this, David, because this takes me back to why we originally wanted to do this entire episode, is there is an absolute overlap, synergy, thank you, with Orthodoxy recovery.
Yes, Orthodox is it's the truth, right? And then the way. So it permeates in all of our nature and what we do.
Yes. So
go ahead,
true.
David.
Amen. There's a couple of things that happen because of this too, that is now you're accountable to somebody. You've got somebody else who's listening to you.
Yes.
Who's understanding this, and he's going to go, okay, I see you now better than sweet. Now I can understand you a little bit, and then moving forward now, you can kind of address the things that are about to pop up because now I know you a little better. Also, I think that's a big thing, at least with the sponsor on a scenario.
Yes, the relationship.
There's also in the book this. They tell you this is part of the deal is after you've done your 4th step, after you've said everything to your sponsor, go home for an hour. Sit in silence. No radio, no TV, no nothing. Sit in it for an hour of silence by yourself. You go over your core stuff and make sure that you didn't leave anything out. And if you did, you need to call your sponsor and immediately get it out. Then anything back is detrimental. Detrimental. It could be the wrench in the bitch. You know what I mean? Like if you get so far down the way and you're like, have that back, and now you start feeling guilt about that little bitch can like pull you out of AA and for sobriety, tasks. So,
Wow, that's quite a tender type of process. That step where you're opening your self disclosure and you're vulnerable. And that's also why I think it's so important to have a very supportive and a good relationship with this sponsor, as we needed in church with our father confessor, right? That needs to be a healthy relationship. But wow, what a tender moment that must be to disclose all of you. Really, you're laying it all out, and much of it, I'm sure, is not pretty. And you're laying that out, and it's all of it. So you're saying if you're leaving something out, go back, because it needs to all come out. What a beautiful thing. But boy, that must be I can imagine very difficult.
To add to that real quick,
Is that
like
Doctor?
this, what, it's the beauty is like, even in Orthodoxy, right? It's like whatever you present to God, right? He's the ultimate physician, right? And he's going to heal. Even when you come, before even I did addiction medicine, I did family medicine. If you didn't tell me what your problem was, I can't help you. Right?
Yeah, right.
You have to come and lay it all out. You can't keep anything hidden, right? Like that's what David said. If there's anything, you better go and call him again.
Yes,
Same thing and same thing with confessions, right? We're emptying it out and saying, "This is heal me," right? And you're seeing it again and again, and that's if we hide it, we won't get healing.
I want this out there right now, real quick, because then I want to actually, Dave, I'm going to give you the last word. You and Dr. Daniel. Say this quickly. You that are listening right now, that maybe you yourself, where you're at in life, maybe struggling with something, I would offer you find an Orthodox church near you, go and speak to a priest, because you're seeing here are 4 men who have experienced in God's grace the healing power of Christ through his church. And these steps, which we've only talked about the first 5 so far, are emulated in many ways in the wisdom of the church and how the church approaches passions and our sin and our faults, our failures and our shortcomings. So I hope that this episode has been helpful. We are planning to do a second part to this where we talk about steps 6 through 12. And please be on the lookout for that. But with that in mind, I'd like to give the floor to Dr. Daniel and then to David. Dr. Daniel, what would you like our audience to be left with today? What are some closing thoughts that you have for our audience?
Yeah, so we'll have more episodes, obviously, and talk about more about substance use and orthodoxy. For the listeners, you're not alone, right? I want you to know that God created the whole universe and everyone around us so that we can find salvation and peace and love, all that, even before we go to heaven. And so there's hope, and I want you to reach out to Orthodox church like Jeremy was mentioning. There's help out there. If you're not ready for God and the spirituality, you can still come. Reach out to your doctors as well. Find someone that's spiritually based to kind of guide you in there. We'll also talk about stigma and all those things on other episodes, right? So that you can feel welcome to not just the substance, but to have a fullness in your life.
Amen. Doctor, how can our audience find you? If they would like to reach out to you, can you tell us about your organization and how they can find you?
Yes, so our organization is called I Am Recovery. Right now, we've started our care. We accept insurances as well. Not all of them, but we're still getting worked on that. You can personally reach out to me at the moment because we have certain hours that we work at. It's not a full on based, but my email is danielageza@gmail.com for now, if that's easier to reach, and then we'll have more information on the next episodes about it too.
David, turning to you now, what would you like to kind of wrap us up? What do you hope this episode is going to accomplish for those listening right now?
Well, I say this. I would hope that if you are watching this episode and you are struggling with any kind of addiction, whether it be alcohol or drugs or food or sex or whatever, I want you to know there is hope, that there is a way out. I am proof, and I'm not perfect by any means, but there is a solution. There is a solution, and I'd like to thank you for watching as much as you have, and ask that if you're really feeling that, reach out. There's some help. You are loved. You are loved.
Amen.
And there is a solution.
Yeah, and perhaps our audience, if the audience have questions for Dr. Daniel or David, leave them in the comments below. And then in part 2, we can dedicate a section to answering your questions. Perhaps you have some thoughts, suggestions, critique, and we would love to address those for you. So please participate in that if you will.
Amen. That's an awesome idea. Love that. We look forward to hearing your questions for future episodes. Thank you for listening this long. This has been Cloud of Witnesses Radio. To our guests, thank you guys. God bless you. And we're signing off.
Take care.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Nick from Cloud of Witnesses, and we're super excited to announce our collaboration with Lucia Candle Company.
From devotional candles to baptismal and wedding candles, Lucia Candle Company has high-quality products to bless any occasion. Add a touch of inspiration to your icon corner with our 100% natural white beeswax candles, complete with icons and quotes from beloved saints, new and old. Check out our online shop at luciacandlecompany.etsy.com. Link is in the description below. Thank you and God bless you.